2 years ago, a German Shepherd named Max lived a life no dog should ever endure. His owner, a man once trusted to care for him, turned into his worst nightmare. Max suffered in silence. Cold nights on a hard floor, meals that rarely came, and punishments he never deserved. Neighbors often heard his faint whimpers, but behind closed doors, no one knew just how much pain he bore. But fate has a strange way of turning the tables. One day, after a particularly brutal beating, Max was abandoned on the outskirts of town. Left to fend for himself, he wandered the streets, his ribs visible beneath his matted fur. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, but the wounds on his heart ran even deeper. Despite everything, he didn't give up. He scavenged for food, dodged dangers, and learned to survive. Then, something incredible happened. A kind-hearted woman named Emily, a local veterinarian, noticed the frail dog limping near her clinic. She knelt down, offering him a gentle hand, something Max hadn't felt in a long time. He hesitated at first, his eyes filled with both fear and longing. But as her warm touch reassured him, he took a step forward, his heart whispering a silent plea for help. Little did anyone know Max's story was far from over. In just 2 years, he would do something that would leave everyone speechless. Something that would prove just how powerful love and resilience could be. But what exactly did Max do? And how did he change the lives of those around him? Stay with us as we uncover the incredible journey of a dog who turned his pain into something truly unbelievable. A cold wind howled through the empty streets as the sky darkened, casting long, eerie shadows across the pavement. The town had settled into silence for the night, but beneath that stillness lurked the ghosts of forgotten stories, one of them belonging to a dog named Max. Rain from an earlier storm had left the roads slick and shimmering under the dim glow of the streetlights. The air carried a strange heaviness, as if the weight of unseen eyes lingered in the darkness. A distant sound, perhaps a rustling in the alley or the faintest echo of footsteps, sent an unsettling chill through the night. Max walked cautiously, his paws pressing against the cold ground. His body, once strong and proud, now trembled with exhaustion. His fur, matted and unkempt, clung to his weakened frame. Every noise made him flinch. Was it just the wind, or something far worse? The world had never been kind to him, and the shadows offered no promises of safety. In the distance, a neon sign flickered above a small building. A veterinary clinic. Its soft glow stood in stark contrast to the darkness around him, almost like a beacon calling him forward. Was this another cruel trick of fate, or was it something else? Max hesitated, his heart pounding against his frail chest. He had learned long ago that trust could be a dangerous thing. But at this moment, as hunger gnawed at his stomach and exhaustion clouded his vision, he had little choice. With slow, unsteady steps, he moved toward the light, unaware that this night would change everything. Max wasn't always like this, a trembling, broken soul wandering the streets. Once, he was a strong and loyal German Shepherd, full of life and devotion. He had a home, an owner, and a purpose, but all of that was stolen from him. His owner, Daniel, had once been a loving man. At least, that's how it seemed in the beginning. Max had been just a pup when Daniel first brought him home, his tiny tail wagging, his heart full of trust. He had grown up believing that love was unconditional, that home meant safety. But Daniel changed. The man who once played fetch with him in the backyard became distant, then cold, then cruel. It started with neglect, missed meals, long hours locked outside in the cold. Then came the yelling, the punishments for things Max didn't understand. And then the violence. A wrong step, a simple mistake, and Daniel's anger would explode. A harsh kick, a thrown object, a hand that once offered treats now only brought pain. Max didn't know what he had done wrong. He only knew that the man he loved had become his worst nightmare. Yet he stayed, because that's what dogs do. They stay, they love, they forgive until they can't anymore. One night, after a particularly brutal beating, Max could barely stand. His ribs ached, his vision blurred, and for the first time in his life, he felt something stronger than loyalty: fear. That was the night he ran. Now 2 years had passed. 2 long years of surviving on scraps, dodging dangers, and learning that the world outside wasn't much kinder than the one he had left behind. He had learned to trust no one. Humans were unpredictable, and kindness was often a trap. But tonight was different. As he stepped closer to the glowing veterinary clinic, the scent of medicine and warmth filled the air. A woman knelt near the entrance, her white coat standing out against the darkness. Dr. Emily Carter. She had seen stray dogs before, but something about this one made her heart ache. His cautious steps, his sunken eyes, the scars hidden beneath his thick fur. This was a dog who had suffered. She reached out a hand, slow and steady. "Hey there, buddy," she whispered. "It's okay. You're safe now." Max froze, his mind screaming at him to turn and run. But something in her voice, soft, patient, unlike anything he had known before, held him there. Emily didn't move closer. She just waited, letting the silence between them stretch. Max took a shaky breath. The cold, the hunger, the fear, it was all too much. For the first time in 2 years, he took a step toward a human, toward hope. And as Emily gently placed a hand on his head, Max closed his eyes, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Trust. Max's journey to healing wasn't easy. Trust was a fragile thing, and for a dog who had been betrayed so many times, it was almost impossible to rebuild. Dr. Emily Carter knew that. She had worked with strays before, seen the kind of damage humans could inflict, not just on a dog's body, but on their soul. Max was different, though. There was something behind his wary eyes, something she couldn't quite place. A deep, lingering pain mixed with an instinct to survive. The first few weeks at the clinic were rough. Max barely ate, barely moved. He flinched at sudden noises, backed away when anyone reached for him, and spent most of his time curled up in the corner of the kennel, watching. Always watching. Emily didn't push. She simply sat near him when she had time, speaking in a low, comforting voice, letting him get used to her presence. Slowly, Max started to change. It was small at first, the way his ears twitched at the sound of her voice, the way he would shift slightly closer when she placed a bowl of food nearby. Then came the first real breakthrough. One evening, after a long day, Emily sat on the floor beside his kennel, exhausted. She sighed and rubbed her temples, whispering, "You're not the only one who's tired, buddy." That's when it happened. Max moved, not away, but toward her. Just a few inches, but enough to make Emily freeze, her breath catching. His dark eyes met hers, and for the first time, there was something else in them, curiosity. From that moment on, things changed. Max started following her around the clinic, keeping his distance but always watching. He let her touch him briefly, cautiously. He even wagged his tail once, a tiny movement, but enough to make Emily's heart swell. But trust was a fragile thing, and it only took one moment to shatter it again. One evening, the clinic was quiet, the sky outside painted with deep shades of purple and gold. Emily had stayed late, finishing up paperwork, when she heard the front door open. She glanced up, expecting a late-night emergency. Instead, her heart dropped. Daniel. He looked different, older, meaner, but those cold, calculating eyes were the same, and they were locked onto Max. "I heard you've got my dog," Daniel said, his voice like gravel. Emily's blood turned to ice. Max had been standing beside her, but the second he saw Daniel, his entire body went rigid. His ears flattened, tail tucked so tightly between his legs it was almost invisible. But his eyes, those dark, haunted eyes, were filled with something Emily hadn't seen before. Terror. Daniel took a step forward, his mouth twisting into something that was supposed to be a smile. "He's mine. Always has been." Emily stepped in front of Max instinctively. "That's not how this works," she said, keeping her voice steady. "You abandoned him. He's not yours anymore." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I didn't abandon him. He ran away, and I want him back." Max whimpered, backing against the wall, his breathing ragged. His entire body shook, his mind caught between fight and flight. Memories flashed in his head. Cold nights, sharp pain, the sound of Daniel's voice dripping with anger. Emily's heart pounded. She could see it. Max was breaking all over again. If Daniel took him, it would be the end. She wouldn't let that happen. "You need to leave," she said firmly. Daniel's expression darkened. "You don't get to tell me what to do." And then he moved too fast. He lunged forward, reaching for Max's collar, his fingers grazing the dog's fur. That single touch sent Max into a frenzy. A snarl ripped from his throat, deep and primal, the kind of sound that sent shivers down the spine. Then, before anyone could react, Max struck. With the speed of a predator, he dodged Daniel's grip and snapped his jaws around the man's wrist. Daniel screamed. The sound was sharp, raw, filled with a fear that he had once forced Max to feel. But this time, the tables had turned. Emily grabbed Max's collar, not to stop him, but to remind him that he was safe, that he didn't have to fight anymore. "Max," she whispered. His body trembled beneath her touch. His growl softened. Slowly, he let go. Daniel stumbled back, clutching his wrist, his face twisted in rage and pain. "You'll regret this," he spat. Emily stood her ground. "Get out." Daniel hesitated, but when Max let out another low growl, he backed away. A second later, the door slammed shut behind him. Silence filled the clinic. Max stood there, his chest rising and falling rapidly, his muscles still tense. Emily knelt beside him, brushing a hand gently over his back. "You're okay," she murmured. "You're safe now." For the first time, Max believed her. And for the first time, he wasn't afraid anymore. The air in the clinic remained thick with tension long after Daniel had left. Emily could still hear the echo of his threats, the venom in his voice lingering like a shadow in the dimly lit space. Max sat beside her, his body stiff, his breathing uneven. She could feel the tremors still running through him, the weight of years of fear threatening to pull him back into the abyss. She placed a gentle hand on his back, feeling the rapid rise and fall of his chest. "He's gone, Max," she whispered. "You're safe." But was he? Daniel wasn't the type to walk away so easily. The look in his eyes had been a promise. This wasn't over. Emily had spent years helping animals escape abuse, but this time, something was different. This time, the monster wasn't just a distant memory. He was out there watching, waiting, and something told her he wasn't going to let Max go without a fight. That night, Emily stayed at the clinic with Max. She wasn't willing to take any risks. The building was secure. Locks on every door, reinforced windows, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Max seemed to feel it too. Long after the lights had been dimmed, he remained alert, ears perked, eyes fixed on the entrance. Every small noise, a creak in the floorboards, the distant sound of a car passing, made him tense. It was like he knew something was coming. Emily sat on the floor beside him, resting a reassuring hand on his fur. "We're okay," she murmured, but even she wasn't convinced. Then, just past midnight, it happened. A soft noise outside, a shuffle barely audible. Max's ears twitched. He lifted his head, nostrils flaring, his muscles coiling like a spring. Emily froze, her heart hammering in her chest. Then, a faint tap against the glass door. Her blood turned to ice. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to move. Slowly, carefully, she reached for the flashlight on her desk and clicked it on. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the front entrance. Nothing. The street outside was empty, but Max didn't relax. If anything, he grew more tense. His gaze locked onto something in the shadows beyond the door, a low, guttural growl rising from his throat. Emily's fingers tightened around the flashlight. "Who's there?" she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. Silence. Then another sound, this time from the side of the building. Emily's stomach twisted. Someone was here. She grabbed her phone, ready to dial the police, when Max suddenly moved. He darted toward the door, his growl turning into a sharp bark. It was a warning, a clear message to whoever was lurking outside. And then, just as suddenly as the noises had started, they stopped. The night fell silent once more. Emily held her breath, waiting, but nothing else came. No footsteps, no movement, just stillness. She exhaled shakily, glancing down at Max. His fur bristled, his eyes still locked on the door. He knew something she didn't. For the rest of the night, neither of them slept. By morning, the eerie stillness had faded, replaced by the hum of the waking city. But the unease in Emily's chest remained. She stepped outside, scanning the area. At first, everything seemed normal. But then, just beyond the clinic's entrance, she saw them. Footprints in the dirt, fresh, leading right up to the door before vanishing back into the shadows. Her pulse quickened. Someone had been there, watching. She looked down at Max. He stared up at her, his dark eyes filled with something she couldn't quite place. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was determination. Max knew this wasn't over, and so did she. The tension in the clinic had reached a breaking point. The eerie silence of the previous night had left Emily restless, and Max remained on edge, his eyes constantly scanning the door as if expecting something, or someone, to appear at any moment. She couldn't ignore the footprints outside. Someone had been watching them. By late afternoon, she decided she couldn't sit idly by anymore. She had called the authorities, but without concrete evidence, there was little they could do. The officer on duty had assured her they would increase patrols in the area, but deep down, Emily knew that wasn't enough. Daniel was out there and he wasn't finished yet. She paced the clinic, running a hand through her hair. She had to be ready for whatever was coming. As night fell, the unease grew heavier. The clinic was quiet, too quiet. Emily had locked every door, checked the windows twice, and kept her phone within reach. But the anxiety wouldn't go away. Max hadn't eaten much all day, his focus solely on the entrance. He could sense it. Something was about to happen. Then, just after midnight, a sound shattered the silence. A loud bang echoed from the back of the building. Emily's heart slammed against her ribs. She grabbed the flashlight and rushed toward the noise, Max already sprinting ahead of her. As she turned the corner, she froze. The back door, which had been locked, was now slightly ajar, the lock hanging broken from the frame. A chill ran down her spine. Someone was inside. Her fingers tightened around the flashlight as she took a shaky step forward. "Who's there?" she called, trying to keep her voice firm. No answer. Max let out a deep, guttural growl. His entire body was tense, his fur bristling. Then movement. A shadow shifted in the darkness. Emily barely had time to react before Daniel stepped forward, his face partially illuminated by the moonlight filtering through the window. His eyes burned with something unhinged, something dangerous. "I told you," he said, his voice low, menacing. "He's mine." Emily swallowed the lump in her throat, forcing herself to stand her ground. "You lost that right a long time ago, Daniel." He took a step closer, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. "You think you can take what's mine and just walk away?" His voice was laced with fury. "You have no idea what he's capable of." Max growled again, his body lowering into a defensive stance. But Daniel just chuckled. "You still don't get it, do you?" he sneered. "You think you saved him?" He took another step forward. "That dog, he's a killer. I made him that way." Emily's blood ran cold. Daniel reached into his coat, and her instincts screamed at her. "Max now!" The German Shepherd lunged. Time seemed to slow as Max sprang forward, teeth bared, a snarl ripping through the air. Daniel barely had time to react before Max's powerful jaws clamped down on his forearm. He let out a strangled scream, stumbling backward as Max yanked him to the ground. Emily didn't hesitate. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911. "There's an intruder in my clinic. Send help now." Daniel thrashed beneath Max's grip, trying to shake him off, but the dog held firm. His growls were low, controlled, not wild, not reckless, but precise. He wasn't attacking out of rage. He was protecting. Just as Daniel reached for his pocket, trying to grab something, Max released his grip and jumped back. His sharp eyes locked onto the man's every move. The sound of approaching sirens filled the night air. Daniel, panting and bleeding, glared up at Emily. "You think this changes anything?" he spat. "He'll always remember what I made him." Emily's hands curled into fists. "No, Daniel. He's not what you made him." She knelt beside Max, running a soothing hand over his head. "He's what he chooses to be." The front door burst open as officers rushed in. Within seconds, Daniel was pinned to the ground, his hands yanked behind his back. He thrashed, yelling, but it was over. Emily exhaled a shaking breath. It was finally over. As the officers led Daniel away, one of them turned to her. "That's one hell of a dog you've got there," he said, nodding toward Max. Emily smiled, her heart swelling with pride as she looked down at him. "Yeah," she said. "He really is." Max sat beside her, his tail wagging slightly. But his eyes, those deep, intelligent eyes, held something else. Peace. For the first time in 2 years, Max was finally free. As the night faded into dawn, Emily sat on the clinic's front steps, Max resting beside her. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving only exhaustion and a deep sense of relief. She ran her fingers through Max's fur, feeling the warmth of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. He was calm now, no longer on high alert. For the first time in years, he could finally rest. Looking down at him, she couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. Max had been broken, betrayed by the one person who was supposed to love him the most. But he had found his way back, not just to safety but to himself. Despite everything he had endured, he had chosen to trust again, to protect rather than harm. It wasn't just instinct that had driven him to stand by her side tonight. It was love. Max was living proof that the past didn't have to define you. He had been forced to survive in a world of cruelty, yet he had chosen to become something greater. He had turned pain into purpose, fear into strength. Emily knew that not every story like Max's had a happy ending. Many animals suffered in silence, their stories untold. But Max's journey was a reminder that kindness could heal wounds, that love could rewrite even the darkest pasts. She glanced down at him as he let out a deep sigh, his body finally relaxing. "You did good, buddy," she whispered. Max blinked up at her, his tail thumping gently against the ground. As the first rays of sunlight painted the horizon, Emily made a silent promise to always fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Because in the end, second chances weren't just given. They were earned, and Max had earned his. Max's story is one of resilience, redemption, and second chances. But what do you think? Do animals remember the ones who hurt them, or do they find a way to forgive? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were in Emily's shoes, would you have taken Max in knowing his past? Or would you have been too afraid? Share your opinions. We'd love to hear them. And if you enjoyed this emotional journey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of courage and survival. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. There are so many stories waiting to be told. Ones that will shock you, move you, and make you think. Stay tuned for the next one because sometimes the most unbelievable stories are the ones that are true.